Welcome everyone to Dissertation 101, Problem Statements, Purpose Statements, and Research Questions. I'm Dr. Basil Considine, and I'm here from the ACU Online Writing Center, and we are going to be delving into some of the most important parts of a dissertation or doctoral study. In these sections, in the problem statement, purpose statement, and research questions, or PICO question if you're a nursing student, you lay out the basic parameters of the work that you'll be doing. The problem statement says, here's the larger issue and the small subset of it that I will be addressing. The purpose statement says, here's what I plan to be doing and why, what we're trying to do. And the research question is a central inquiry that the rest of your work is designed to answer. The answer allowing you to do something else, or for other people to take this information and do an informed intervention, to implement a practice, to add a training, whatever it should be. And one of the reasons that I say that these are so important is because if you have a very broad purpose, it will take you a long while to do. If you have a very general problem, your literature section will be huge. If you have lots of research questions or vague research questions, it will be harder to answer and it will take you more time. And one of the goals of a professional doctorate is to inform your practice of the profession. And so let's make things a manageable scope so that you can finish sooner rather than later and go on with the rest of your lives with your doctorate in hand and with all the doors that will open for you. A little bit about the Online Writing Center. We work with students in just about all of ACU's online programs. Everyone in the ACU community is more than welcome to attend webinars such as this and to access the resources on our website. We will work with students at any stage of your writing, whether you are just looking at the assignment instructions and you have questions, you're wondering about an intricacy of APA style or writing in general, or if you have a draft, partial, complete, something that you are refining and expanding into a dissertation, you're more than welcome to do that and to come to us for help. I have students every week who come and ask questions about formatting their dissertations or doctoral studies, who are looking for feedback on small areas, on large areas. We're happy to work with you. We see most students through what we call asynchronous appointments, meaning not in real time. This is something that we offer at ACU in recognition of people's disparate work schedules. We have some students who are working a quote-unquote traditional 8 to 6 or 9 to 5 job, some people who are working on weekends, night shift, swing shift, anything, or you might be working and taking classes in real time and thus have a rather tight schedule. So one of the things the asynchronous appointments allow you to do is you schedule a time. By the time that rolls around, you upload your paper, and then we'll go ahead and look at it and send you feedback within the next 24 hours. So you do not need to be present. You do not need to be awake during the appointment. I've once asked one of my students who frequently schedules the 11:30 appointment, and on a Friday night, I asked, so are you actually up writing? And they said, no, but if case I went out to have dinner after work or something like that, I've wanted the extra lead time, but usually I submit my paper and go right to bed, and that's totally okay. Whatever works for you. We have a variety of different times in the schedule to better suit your needs. We also see students through real-time appointments via phone or Zoom, and those are generally by request. Send us an email, give us a range of times, and we're happy to help you as our staff are available. If you are asking during week 0, week 1, really good availability. If you're asking week 7 when all the assignments are due, that tends to be a little bit harder to work in a real-time one. So we do recommend that you schedule appointments in advance, and if you're requesting a phone or Zoom one, give us a range of potential times. We have a whole suite of resources and blog posts and templates and things like that on the Online Writing Center website that we're going to look at in a little bit. Again, the general process for an appointment, you schedule an appointment. This is done using the software for, This is done using our scheduling software, WC Online. By the time your appointment rolls around, you upload your paper to Canvas, and then we send you feedback within 24 hours. Some webinars that you might be interested in coming up, I will particularly point out that avoiding plagiarism with APA 7. When you are writing a dissertation or a doctoral study, you're often dealing with types of sources that you won't have used earlier in your coursework. You might be using personal communications, unpublished data. You might be dealing with internal only documents and things like that. And one of the things that is covered in the Avoiding Plagiarism with APA 7 webinar is how to cite these different sources and how to refer to them. Interviews are a common other thing that gets cited there too. Coming up on Tuesday, the 23rd, I'll be teaching ADD in Progress annotated bibliographies. If you're in any of our other programs and you're writing an annotated bibliography, feel free to drop in. It just happens for that webinar, we will be using a specific example assignment there. Someone wrote in the chat that they need help with citations. If you can tell me what the specific type of source that you're looking to cite, I can give you a specific example. So for example, if you're looking to cite email communication for someone, and I can give you the format for that, or if it's how to cite interview. Actually, you know what? I'm going to just start typing some of those examples in the chat window. And if you follow up with your specific question or the area that you're looking for help with, I can type that in. Okay, great. So if you are citing a book chapter in APA style, the first question is this a chapter in a book by a single author or set of authors where they all wrote the same material? Or is this an edited volume where there are different authors for each chapter? And I'm going to show you a resource for this. Of course, the gold standard is the APA 7 manual. I have a copy of it on my desk in front of me. But something that is also extremely helpful and a new resource with APA 7th edition is the APA Style website here, apastyle.apa.org. And one of the things here is that they have a great deal of examples here. And I find that most students, and myself included, are visual learners, so that if we look at an example in front of us, we can copy that and make the changes. So we'll look at two related things: how you reference a chapter in an edited book and how you cite it. So in this case, I've gone to apastyle.org. I have gone to the Style and Grammar Guidelines section, went to References, Examples, and selected Chapter in an Edited Book. And by the way, please let me know if the text here is not at an easily readable size. I can always zoom in. So, Chapter in an Edited Book. How it shows up in our reference section, let's look at this example here that I've highlighted. So first you list the author for the chapter itself, then the publication year, then you give the title of the chapter. The title of the chapter is Currents in the Study of Persuasion. Then you have in, and then the list of initials and last names for the editors, parentheses, EDS period, that just stands for editors. If you only had one, it would be ED period. Then we have the title of the book, that's the one in italics, the edition number if there's multiple editions, the page range for that whole chapter, and then the publisher name. Now, how would we cite that? We would cite it the same way we would do any other source in the text: author, date. So if we were going with this example that I'm showing you, it would be Dillard, 2020. All right, excellent question. And if you have a question like that, feel free to name drop it in the chat, or you can send it to me in a private message, because there may be something you want to ask, but you don't want to ask in front of the group. Just send me the question, either it's a private message or in the chat, and I will get to it at an appropriate pausing point. All right, if you happen to be in this webinar, you're probably not going to the conflict management edition, but in webinar because that's linked to counseling. But like the avoiding plagiarism one, it does deal substantially with how to cite sources that aren't published and accessible to the public. So I will be talking and showing how to format interview transcripts, quotes from people you interviewed, information you got from surveys, and things like that. So if that sounds like something you might be doing in your dissertation, you might consider dropping in on the About Unpublished Sources webinar on Tuesday, March 30th. All right. I'm going to show you a couple things because usually if you're coming to Dissertation 101, you are expecting or working on writing a dissertation or doctoral study. And we have been greatly expanding the available resources. So in addition to the webinars that I just talked about, we have a much larger body on the Writing Center website. So I've loaded up here in my shared screen the ACU Online Writing Center website. And if we go to resources here, you'll see a variety of those things, including if you wanted to grab a copy of our dissertation or doctoral study templates. Those save a whole lot of time over formatting. And if we go to services, writing webinars, you'll see that the schedule here, we have the upcoming webinars for this term listed up top. And after that, we have an alphabetized list here. So if we roll down to Dissertation 101, you see that we have a recording that's already available. And depending on who's involved in the webinar, who is attending, we might customize some of those examples. So I've had students say that they watch all the videos and that they gain something different from each one. So certainly that is something that you can do. Also, right underneath it, doctoral writing and the concept proposal. So one of the first major milestones when you're working on your dissertation or doctoral study is when you have the concept proposal. Essentially, this is a draft of the first couple chapters, of usually the first three, your introduction, your literature review, and your research methods chapters. And together these say, one is, here's what I'm planning on doing. The literature review says, here's stuff you should know that other people have written related to this or discovered related to this. And the third chapter is, and here are the specifics of how I'm going to try and get the data I need to answer this question, to address this problem. And here's how that is grounded in what people have done before. So we have a webinar on that. There are many others on this page here. You'll see that we have the growing EDD in progress section here that delves into different areas using the specific examples. If you're a nursing student, we have a parallel doctoral writing as a nurse series here that looks at different milestones here and things you might do along the way, like formatting figures and tables, SPSS output, and so on and so forth. So those resources are all available, and we will be adding those. We will be adding additional webinars as we proceed. Every term, I design a few more webinars in response to things we see as needs, and also in response to students such as yourselves who send us emails, comments, and other requests that we add something on a topic. So if there's something you'd really like to know, please let us know. Our main time today is going to be spent on three related things: problem statements, purpose statements, and research questions. Let's look at that first one. Now, there are a couple things that you'll see me showing here and talking about. And if you are in the EDD program, these happen to be ones specific to your program. If you're in the DMP program, the same things exist for the nursing program, but it just happens the examples we're using today are from EDD. All right, So one thing that's really helpful, if you're just trying to grasp what does a problem statement look like, it's really helpful to just go look at an example. And all ACU dissertations and doctoral studies, doctoral projects, are posted for public view in our digital commons. You can also look at those from other institutions using the second link here for ProQuest theses and dissertations. If you're really curious, you could go ahead and look up my dissertation in ProQuest. It's called Priests, Pirates, Opera Singers, and Slaves, Saget and European Art Music in Mauritius, the Little Paris of the Indian Ocean. And yes, it did involve pirates. I had a lot of fun doing work on the other side of the world, and you can find your professor's dissertations or doctoral projects if you're very curious. It's often a great way to spark conversation, and some students will look at their different faculty members and then, based on something in their past research that catches their eye, approach a particular faculty member and ask them if they would be on their committee. We are going to go ahead and look at the ACU Digital Commons, and I'll share that link in the chat window. So the ACU Digital Commons, we have both the dissertations and doctoral studies from ACU Dallas, the online programs, as well as the mother campus in Abilene. So if you're wondering what a topic you're not expecting is doing here, it's because this is for all of Abilene Christian University and not just the ACU Dallas online programs. So if we go ahead, just looking here, this is showing things in a chronological order here. I am always happy to see the names of students that I've worked on showing up here, because that tells me not only is their work done, not only have they graduated and moved on to all the other things that come when you're done with your dissertation, but also you can see here there's actually a fair number of people downloading and reading these. I will say that some of my nursing students in particular have done projects that almost immediately they start getting a whole lot of downloads because it was about an active issue, something that they noticed and that their colleagues also were seeing in their work. EDD dissertations, there's one student of mine who I remember who, like a month after he finished his dissertation, he was presenting about his research at a conference. And I happened to come by and notice, oh, he has like 150 downloads. Wow, popular research. So it's always nice to know that other people are reading your research. Let us take a look at, you know what, let's go with the Dr. Craddock's research here. So if I click on that, it'll tell you what department and what degree. So usually students will go looking for something similar to what they're doing, same degree type, and sometimes they'll look for, oh, well, I've got my committee chair assigned. I'd like to see what they have approved in the past and look at a couple of those. That's totally okay. I read my dissertation advisor's dissertation before she became my dissertation advisor, and it actually led to a lot of fun conversations. So in this case, we can access the document by going ahead and scrolling down, and we can browse to it here. But also, if you want to have a copy, you can just download here. I'm going to recommend downloading because you usually have more control over a dedicated PDF reader or reader window like this than if something's embedded in the page. So it's a lot easier to search around. So let's go ahead and we're going to look for Dr. Craddock's problem statement. Now, how do you know where to go? Well, we can start with the table of contents here. And we'll see that it is called Statement of the Problem here. That's very specific. It's exactly what we want it to be. So we'll go ahead and we'll head on down to page 7. And it happens the other things we're going to be talking about today, purpose of the study, the research questions, are right after. All right, so let's head on down there. All right, so what this section should be doing is laying out what the study was designed to do. And did I say purpose? I meant problem statement. We want to go and look at the problem statement first. All right, so let's see what this lays out here. For almost a century, standardized tests combined with high school grade point average have been utilized as essential measures in determining a student's admission into college, with most colleges and universities requiring submission of these cognitive indicators for admission. Standardized tests have been found to provide good predictive value in determining first-year college GPA. However, Dalka et al.'s research shows these tests either over or underpredict GPA for underrepresented and low socioeconomic populations. This is problematic for institutions that focus specifically on cognitive measures in the admission process and limits a fair consideration for students from marginalized populations. Enrollment leaders tasked with broadening access to higher education for all student populations have responded by adapting current admission practices. So these last two sentences here, it's a two-part statement of the general problem. So the general problem is that these focusing on these measures is not being fair or accurate. And so there has been a response, but I bet when we go to this next paragraph, it's going to zoom in and we'll hear the specific problem. Let's see what we have. Contradictory research findings identified the problem identified the problem of colleges placing considerable emphasis on cognitive factors, specifically standardized test scores, in the admission decision process, potentially excluding candidates from consideration. In response, proponents of expanding college access advocate for assessing non-cognitive factors in the admissions process. Then we get some supporting evidence and examples. Sternberg et al. Argued the predictive value of cognitive indicators is more reliable when combined with non-cognitive attributes. Non-cognitive indicators, such as list of stuff, are not measured by a traditional admissions test, yet research shows they are potential predictors of student success. So I'm going to guess that we're looking at a practice gap of some sort. All right. In response to this, Gore et al. Developed the Student Strengths Inventory, a valid and reliable instrument. It measures these things. However, it is not clear how well each of these constructs, which are subscales of the SSI, predict academic success and persistence, and if they are better predictors than traditional cognitive predictors, such as these things. Okay, I was wrong. It wasn't a practice gap. It is a research gap because they developed something to try and address the practice gap, but it's not clear if it works well. All right. Now, if you are writing this yourself, I would suggest that you introduce the general and specific problems with explicitly clear wording. Like, the general problem is that institutions that focus specifically, and that just tells your reader with no doubt that is the thing you're identifying. Do you have to? No, there are other ways of making that clear, and clearly, this is an approved dissertation, but it will speed up your process of approval and clarify things to your committee and to yourself what exactly you're focusing on if you label that clearly. One of the areas that is especially helpful is when you're looking at the alignment. Does your problem statement align with your purpose statement? Do those align with your research questions? It'll be a lot easier to check if you've clearly labeled where you're stating each of those things. Okay, so that's a good example there. Let's go and look at another one here. Let us look for something in the nursing field. So let's see. This looks like it might be a DNP project. Let's take a look here. Okay, that's actually social work, so we won't look at that here. This could be in a couple fields. So this is a good point to point out that you actually have some search capabilities here. So you could do a search here for nursing practice, for example, and limit your results and look and say, oh, you know what? I'm going to go ahead and take this one here. And you'll see it is, in fact, a Doctor of Nursing Practice degree. So while it is fun to browse, you can cut to the chase by doing a search, as you just saw me do. All right, so let's go ahead and look at this student's problem statement. And in this case, using the terminology common to nursing studies, it is being called the problem of interest. The Joint Commission reported that miscommunication during patient handoff was responsible for 80% of serious medical errors. And expands that patient communication is significant, but not simple in a complex healthcare environment. There's some supporting evidence to this point. Leading up to this conclusion, lack of effective communication between patients and caregivers causes medication errors, and clear communication among patients and caregivers can prevent such mistakes. All right, and now we're going to zero in a bit. Medication errors cut across many areas of hospital operations, killed lots of people. Definition of that, they're preventable but continue to be a challenge to healthcare quality. And now it's making it specific to nursing. All right, let's jump back to the table of contents and look at the arrangement of this here. So this lays out the problem of interest. Then after the basic problem of interest is understood, there's a background section to give more detail on that. Things that now that we've understand what the problem is will be more helpful than if all that information was given at once. Then after that, there's the purpose section. Now, some doctoral projects and dissertations won't have a background section here. Some topics require a little bit more introduction or explanation, and others don't. So if you don't have this, don't be concerned. But if your professor says, give us some background, then you might just put it in a section like that. All right, let's go on to the purpose of the study here. The primary purpose of the project was to utilize a medication administration checklist to improve the nurse handoff process and reduce the number of medication administration errors. This aligns very well with a problem of interest description earlier, because as you may recall, at the end of that, it was zeroing in on, okay, this cuts across many errors, it's preventable, and nurses play a leading role. So great alignment there. All right, continuing here, the implementation of the standardized checklist was expected to decrease administration errors. Now, when you are writing this for the first time, your problem statement will be describing something that exists right now. So you'll describe the problem in present tense. If you're referring to research related to the problem, well, that research already took place, or published research at least, so you would refer to that in past tense. But when you're first writing the purpose section, before you do the actual study or project, the purpose section will be using present tense to describe what you have laid out. So when this was originally submitted for the chapter review, it would have read, the primary purpose of the project is to utilize, because it's saying these are the things we are right now planning on doing. And for specific actions, it will be things like the implementation of the standardized checklist is expected to decrease medication errors. And if it's something where there's a training, you would use future tense, like a 1 hour training on this will be administered to this group. That will tells us the future tense. And then after you've actually done the work, you go and revise your chapter to update the tense to reflect things that you have done, things that you have completed. But when you first write this, this will be in present and future tense, depending on whether you're talking about details you set or actions that you will do but haven't done just yet. All right, now if we go down to the research question here, we have a PICOT question laid out here. Among nurses on a cardiac progressive care unit, what effect does a checklist have on medication errors as compared to the medication errors on the unit with no checklist? And although the question has all the components that we need, uh, we have them spelled out just for clarity. Population defined was this. The intervention was that. Bedside reports were the comparison. All right. Now, you might be asking, well, T, uh, why isn't T in the question here? Uh, you could include it. In fact, I would recommend doing it, but they do have it listed down here, saying that the time for the project referred to the 3 months immediately before and 3 months after. So one of the reasons that you would want to include it is that if someone is looking to see, okay, well, does this relate to what I'm interested in? Having it there helps clarify, okay, that's the interval in question. Now, it's a little different if you're, say, measuring pain 3 hours after versus we're trying to get different measurement points with time for things to have happened. But I would still say err on the side of including the T in the question itself. Some professors will be okay with your leaving that out and having it in parentheses here. Others will say, put it all in the question. And so I'd say go with putting it all in the question because that way you're good no matter what. The fact that the student has gone into additional detail on each element here, some projects will need this, some won't. In this case, it lets you put in things that cramming all this into the question would end up with a question that was this long. So in this case, having it as a quick follow-up improves the readability. All right, let us go back to the slides for a moment. So problem statements. Your problem statement is first a concise statement of the larger problem that is being in some way addressed by what you are doing. It's also refers more broadly to the section, whether it's called problem statement or statement of the problem, the larger statement in which you're expanding that earlier concise statement into a couple paragraphs usually of text that describe and document the problem. Tell us how you know it's a problem, tell us what the scope is, and also keep in mind that you don't have to give all of that information now. A lot of the discussion about the scope of the problem will be in the lit review section, where you can discuss all the things that were talked about earlier that you deem relevant. But we're going to be doing a more focused version here in the problem statement section. You want to lay out the topic, the issue, the evidence, and deficiencies in the evidence, because it's often related to why something can't be done or why something needs to be done, and what remedying the deficiency will do for your select or target audience. You're not trying to solve things for everyone the world round. You are taking a subset of the larger problem and identifying it and telling us what are the stakes here for not addressing it, and a little bit what will. Not a ton on the why this is significant, because there's a whole section for that later, but a little bit to understand the scope of the problem. And a helpful formula, you don't have to follow this exact one, but a helpful one that I'll suggest is to say, first tell us the general problem, then the specific problem, discuss the evidence, tell us how these problems have been documented. What are the issues that make this an active problem? And help us understand the implications of the problem not being addressed. Okay, purpose statement. We looked briefly at this, but we're going to go back and look at this in more detail. Purpose statement is basically laying out what you're setting out to do in terms of your goals, the methods or actions, the instruments that you're going to be using, why you're doing this, which is generally you want to change something that's existing and contributing or being the problem. So it should definitely be referencing something that you mentioned in the problem statement. And in short, you describe what you plan to do to address some part of the specific problem that you identified in the problem statement section. Now, I say the specific problem and recommend that you label the specific problem in that section because I often work with students who they have their first round of faculty feedback and they get it feedback telling them, hey, uh, your purpose statement is actually about it's describing addressing part of the general problem, but not the specific one that you said you were doing. Those two are out of alignment. So labeling those clearly will help you check quickly and make sure that as your study or project evolves, that you are keeping those consistent. In this section, you'll want to state things in terms of the designed or planned outcomes, like the purpose of the study is to develop, or XYZ will be administered to the ABC in order to, and things like this study is specifically designed to generate these results in order to do this thing. All right, research questions. And I encourage questions as we go along. Please feel free to ask. We're covering a lot of material quickly. Research questions. Well, we need to distinguish between interview or survey questions. This is a very common error. And back when I taught in a physical campus, I'd sometimes hear people in the hall saying, oh yeah, I've got 20 research questions, and my ears would prick up. And I'd think, no, those are almost certainly interview or survey questions. If you've got 20 research questions, you need to break this up into more compact studies because 20 research questions would just be, years and years and years and years to solve. And even then, it's probably breaking into hierarchy of primary research questions and secondary research questions you need to answer the primary ones. So interview or survey questions, these are questions you're asking your participants and so that you're posing to the sample of research participants. Research questions are specific answerable questions that you are trying to answer, not the participants. You are trying to answer these. And they're designed so that if you answer them, it will help you address some aspect of the specific research problem that you have chosen. They're also a means of focusing your study and determining whether it's in scope or out of scope to do something. If it won't help you answer the research questions, it might be interesting, but out of scope. It helps you determine the methodology, depending on what kind of answers you're trying to get, what you need to do that. If you need statistically significant results, well, we're going to be doing some stats operations and looking at p-values and things like that. And they're a really helpful way of guiding the inquiry that you do, your analysis, and the reporting. One of the things you do in your chapter 5 is you will provide the answers to the research questions and then discuss, well, okay, what does this mean now that we know that? What makes a good research question? Should be clear, focused, complex. Generally, a yes or no answer to a research question isn't terribly helpful. Arguable, meaning that this is something that you can actually answer, and reasonably concise. Now, the general guideline we give people for writing in APA style is 3 lines for a sentence is a good rule of thumb max. Occasionally, you'll have a research question that goes a little bit longer. PICO questions that go a little bit longer are not uncommon, but just make sure that each research question is asking about one thing. And that's what will generally lead you to have 2, 3, or 4 research questions that they're related, but they'll have separate yes, no, or yes, but, or here's a list of things kind of answers. And it's very common to have a set of secondary research questions that are yes, no ones, because those will let you then answer a primary research question like, what are some effective means of doing X? So clear, you want to have enough specifics to orient the reader, but not too many. Focused, you've heard me talk a bit about answering in a reasonable scope of drawing a box around your dissertation or doctoral project. We want you to succeed. We want you to go and do many great things after you're done at ACU. And one of those is not biting off more than you need to do. I had a student once come in and they said that they wanted to do a long-term study, and I asked, how long-term? Well, they said, how about 3 years? And I said, oh, how about you do 6 months or a year, and then you can continue the research using your data and building on it afterwards. And they did that, and they in fact graduated in they chose a 6-month option, and they were graduated 1 year later. So they had 2 more years where they could continue on that research afterwards, or not as they pleased, but they had that choice because they focused their research questions and narrowed the scope of their study. Complex, you want this to be something where you need to look at multiple sources of information. It was easy to answer just a yes, no for your primary research question, and you might have people questioning, well, wait, is this appropriate scale for a doctorate? Arguable, so that's something where you have to do some work to answer this, that just looking at what people have currently published and reported is not going to be a sufficient answer to that. Now, you might be taking what people publish and doing something new. This happens a lot if you do, say, a systematic review of the literature. But there, where you're adding is the perspective of having grabbed all these things and compared them and use that to extract, oh, based on all these things, here's what should be done. Here are the best practices, as demonstrated by this large set of data that no one had looked at in this way. No one had grouped them together in this way before. So where are the problems with these things? Well, usually it comes with a lack of alignment, where you look at the research questions and the problem statement and you say, well, hold on, that doesn't seem to be speaking to the same thing. Either too general, it's not clear what exactly you're trying to do with it, or impractical to answer, or it's just not clear what the scope is. Now, if you are in nursing studies, you know that the P in PICO question, the nursing shorthand for a particular type of research question, the P in PICO question is the population. And that's one of the ways that you make it more specific and narrow down the scope. If you are doing an EDD dissertation, and you might be looking for results that are generalizable to the larger population, but for the purpose of your study, you're asking, well, what are the answers to these questions with my local population, whatever that happens to be? So at this point, we'll just check in and see, does anyone have any questions about things I've been talking about so far? If you have a question you're comfortable asking in the general chat, just type it away. If it's something you'd like to send me a message in private, you just in the chat window on the to field, just select my name and you can send me a private message there. The next thing that we're going to do is we are going to go look at a related assignment, in this case for the EDD program. And I'm going to go ahead and change my screen sharing to my web browser. So you should now see I have brought up the problem statement article summaries assignment from Leadership 765. And this is a great assignment to do with the goal of I am looking at what a problem statement is, a clear problem statement, so that I can model my own on the examples I like. So a lot of students will just go out and look up random articles, I would say look for articles that are very closely related to your research interest. And this is a point where I'm going to ask for some participation. If you can type in the chat window what a area of interest is for you. It could be something you're planning on doing for your doctorate. It could be something that just really interests you and you think is cool and relevant to what you're doing. So again, you can either send me a private message or just type in the general chat, what is a research interest of yours? And then I'm going to go ahead and head off to the ACU library. The ACU library is just acu.edu/library. And we're going to go ahead and look for some of these things that people have typed in here. So I see police organizations, and that's something that could go many different ways. And you can tweak your search terms on this, but we're just starting with police organizations, and you'll see, oh, there's actually a great deal of literature here. That came up with 17,000 results. I was thinking maybe we might need to reword that as police force or something like that, but we got a lot of results here. So here are some restrictions that will be very helpful to do. Full text, so stuff we can look at immediately. If there's 17,000 choices, we might as well make sure that these are ones we can look at. And that will reduce the spread a little bit. So we're down to 13,500. We're also going to look at scholarly peer-reviewed journal articles. And because this is something that we might want to be using later for the actual dissertation or doctoral study, we're also going to put in a date restriction. So here's a question to think about. What qualifies as recent research? In general, a good rule of thumb is published in the last 5 years. But there may be some events that change this significantly. For those of you who are in nursing, you may recall that the passage of the Affordable Care Act and the phase-in of some of its provisions changed healthcare very profoundly. Those of you who are in education, you may recall that the passage of the No Child Left Behind Act and the implementation of the Common Core also had very profound effects. So if you have something like that, even though the research might be within your general range for recent research, you may want to not look at stuff before because it's just hard to compare the data. And I would say standardized testing for those last two things has really made a huge difference and might make you want to draw a line in the sand. Another thing to keep in mind is that if you're looking at what is recent research for your dissertation, well, when you go and defend, it's going to take you some time to write your dissertation and finish your coursework and everything. So long as you're doing this, I'd say set that date to be earlier rather than later. So I'm sorry, to be more recent rather than older. And you'll see that just 2019 to 2021, we have a good amount, 564. So we're not exactly lacking for research here. All right, I'm going to go ahead and look at the second article here. And I'll go ahead and follow the link here. And my goal here is to identify the problem statement because that happens to be the first task in this assignment. Now it looks like we've landed at the journal webpage. So, okay, let's go ahead. Okay, that was in volume 11, 2020. All right, so let's see. Oh, this is being published a lot. Well, let's go ahead and select 2020. And I don't know what date it has. Let's take a peek back here. You know what? This is one of those cases where I think it'll probably be faster if I just select the title and search for it. So let's do exactly that. All right, so we've got this article. It is, brief, 385 words. Okay, this might be um, a little short, but let's take a peek here. That looks like it might be the abstract length because there's this link here. Well, let's just look at it for now. Working in a police organization often involves being exposed to potentially traumatic events. Okay, that's not great, but that's probably background. Police mental health is a public health concern, but the mental health of civilian employees working in police organizations has been much less studied. Okay, so this is saying there's a research gap there. And okay, looking through this. Yeah, I believe this is the abstract. And let's see if we can find the complete document. Click the download link on the page. Great. All right, now that has opened up this article on my computer, so I'm just going to go ahead and share that window with you. All right, so we have here the abstract at the beginning. That's the text that was shown. And let's first go ahead and see if they use the word problem here. Mental health problems, okay, no. Let's see if they use the word issue. A couple times, but not really to describe the problem here. So let's now look at the introduction and see if that tells us here. So I am going to scan through this text really fast. I'll make it a little bit larger so that it's easier to read. Let me know if it needs to be larger for you to be able to read it on your screen. Okay. Okay, I have identified it. We have a two-part problem statement here. Police officers are exposed to traumatic situations frequently in the course of their duties, which can lead to occupational stress injuries such as depression, anxiety, PTSD, and substance abuse. The effects of trauma exposure, whether acute or cumulative, direct or vicarious, can not only affect the individual but also their families and their organization through increased sick time and increased injury risk. All right, so this is a two-part problem statement. They have the general, this thing happens, and then they have, and this affects these groups in a negative fashion, and they lay out what that is. All right, great. If you're looking for the purpose statement, that is actually labeled here with a sentence saying, the purpose of the study is to, here, the purpose of the study was to compare the mean scores on selected mental health screening tools, et cetera, et cetera. All right, we have a couple other things that other people have written in here, so let's head back to the library search, and we'll finish up with this. All right, back to the library search screen. All right, someone mentioned model for adjunct faculty. I'm curious to see what we'll come up with there. This is one of those things where my immediate instinct is to say, well, that's probably going to be worded a couple different ways. I would like to talk with a librarian about that. So you could go to this Ask a Librarian link, and actually we're within the normal hours where that is staffed, so we could actually ask them in the chat right now. We won't do that because we only have a few more minutes before our hour is up, but you could certainly do this if you were doing the assignment yourself. All right, so I mentioned I wasn't sure if what we would get here, and it's probably because there's a little bit more information that we need, and I typed in family instead of faculty. So when you are communicating with our library colleagues, they'll often ask you, what are your search terms? You can just take the link here at the top and send it to them, and if there was a typo like that, they would spot that right away. Our librarians are great. Now, we only got 15 responses here. So I bet there are other ways to word this, and we'll talk about that in a little bit more. But let's go ahead and this ebook here. So it's not a journal article, so it wouldn't meet the requirements for the assignment we're talking about, but that might be of interest to look at. Also, I have known that some students have written their instructor saying, "Hey, can I look at this book instead?" and gotten that approved as an exception. So that's okay. This looks like it might be of a great relevance here: contingent labor in higher education. And let's go ahead and let's see if we have a clear problem statement. Well, not with that word. No. All right. So let's take a look and see what we have here. Okay, I believe this is the problem statement here. Because this is written more as an essay, more as an argumentative essay than a study, that it is not as explicitly worded as you would do it for a dissertation or doctoral study, but here we are. The growing phenomenon of contingent academic labor is a symptom of an alarming trend toward educational reform that not only threatens educational standards and the importance of a college education, but also devalues the teaching profession and underestimates the skill and knowledge required to be a good teacher. So that looks like the general problem, and there's probably a place where they get more specific later. For reasons of time, we're going to go look at one more example, and let's look at malaria eradication. So this is something where you would find the literature in both medicine and nursing, as well as in public health epidemiology. But let's just do a search just for those words and see what comes in. I would also probably try malaria prevention, but let's see what eradication comes in. Incidentally, I am a Fulbright faculty fellow to Madagascar, and so I have been prescribed all sorts of anti-malarials to take on this, and let's just say it is one of those things I hope to never take home with me as a souvenir. All right, so this is more broad, it's also a book. So let's go ahead and we'll put on our limitations. Scholarly peer-reviewed. We're probably less interested in the stuff from 1825. While there is some interesting historical literature on malaria in the 19th century, I think we want to focus our time on more recent research. Full text. And let's go ahead. Malaria, I don't honestly know, but with a lot of the World Health Organization stuff coming out at specific intervals, we might need to cast a broader net. Let's go ahead and let's start with 2010 to 2021 and see what we come up for numbers. Okay, that is still quite a lot, which is perhaps a symptom of the scope of the problem. So let's go ahead and go more recent now that we've realized that we're not going to be cutting off and having no sources to look at. All right, so achieving global malaria eradication in changing landscapes. Let's look at this one. Whoops, wrong link. And we'll finish with this. We'll go a little bit past the hour. So if you have to dash, don't worry. We will publish the recording online. And if you didn't RSVP but would like a copy of the webinar, just type your email address in the chat room or send me a direct message and I'll add you to the list. So here we have, this looks like the general problem statement. Malaria continues to be a major public health burden globally, with over 200 million cases in 2018. Despite effective treatment and control measures, over 400,000 deaths are caused by malaria annually, primarily in sub-Saharan Africa. So it's a two-part general problem statement. And how do we know it's the general problem statement rather than the specific one? Because it's talking about the global scope. And it would be difficult to address all of that in any one study or essay or any sort of article. Now, if we look through this here, we see that they're describing a framework for incorporating something into the malaria eradication strategies. So based on that, I'm guessing that the more specific thing is somewhere in this paragraph here. So let's see here. I don't think it was actually there. Okay, at a guess, I would say that the specific problem is these two sentences here. So if I'm right, and this seems to align with the purpose of the study, then the specific problem is malaria eradication is not feasible without addressing these changing risks while, and in more details. And that because of that, we get the next sentence. Multi-sectoral cooperation approaches are essential to achieve malaria eradication. So this looks like a practice gap where it's saying, well, we know these things, but if these things aren't done, it's not possible to do it. It's not feasible to just eradicate it. And that is a great specific problem. This is saying, okay, so there's this practice gap. We know how to do things, but stuff is not getting done. And then if we were to look at the description of the project down here, they reference other things that had to be done in order to have successful eradication and programs. And that is a good pausing point for us. So thank you very much for attending this evening webinar. I see a couple of you have given me your email addresses. I will add you to the list to get a copy of the slide deck. And with that, I bid you good night. We will have more webinars coming up soon.